How's it going, guys? Today I'm going to show you how to dial in your table saw so you can get those perfect cuts every time. And the reason I'm doing this is because lately I've been noticing my table saw has a tendency of pulling the wood away from the fence as I'm making a cut. So I'll show you guys how to fix that, and I'll also show you how to clean up your table saw surface and get it all waxed up nice and smooth and prevent it from corroding in the future. So if you guys want to see that, stay tuned and I'll be glad to show you. To get started, I'm going to begin by cleaning off the surface on my cast iron table saw, and for that I'm just going to use some WD-40 and Scotch-Brite pads. And the first thing I want to do is take off my insert just so I don't have to worry about getting that dirty. And then I'll spray on the WD-40. And then I'll just give it some elbow grease until I get all the rust off. And then using some paper towel, I can go ahead and wipe it all off. So now I have all that surface rust off my table saw. I do have some deeper spots, but for that I would recommend using an abrasive pad on a random orbital sander. I just don't have that set up right now, so I'm fine with doing it as is. Now what I want to do next is apply a corrosion preventative, and for that I'm going to use some Bow Shield T9. This stuff works great. I use it on my joiner and I'm going to use it on my table saw. I'll spray it on just like I did the WD-40, and then I'll wipe off the excess with the paper towel, and I'll give it a nice paste wax finish so the wood can slide through nice and easy. So now that my table saw is cleaned off, I can go ahead and start fine tuning it. And the first thing you're going to want to check is to make sure your blade is aligned and parallel with your miter tracks. And a quick and easy way to do that is by taking a combination square, and you'll set it so that the front tooth is just nicking it. And that's kind of how I have it right now. It's just barely touching it. And then you'll want to check it in the back as well. And you're going to follow the same tooth on the back side, and then it should be just nicking it. Now, in my situation, I have about a 1/16 gap on the back side, so that's been kind of a major issue with how I've been cutting stuff lately. It's just been pulling my lumber off the fence. And if you have the opposite issue, it's gonna be pushing it into the fence, and that's a really good recipe for kickback. So you'll wanna go ahead and address that immediately, and that's what I'm gonna be doing right now. So let's go ahead and adjust this. So I went ahead and removed the cover on the back side of my table saw so you guys could see this a little bit better. But basically on my saw, there's 2 screws in the front and 2 screws in the back. And if I loosen those up, I'm able to move the whole motor. Now some saws are different, so you have to check your owner's manual. But basically I'm just gonna go from down here, I'm gonna slightly adjust it, check up top, and then once I get it where I like it, I'll tighten them up and I'll recheck it up top just to make sure everything's good. So this is gonna take a couple tries back and forth, but eventually I'll get it exactly where I want it to be. And after making that adjustment, I now have my table saw blade perfectly parallel with the miter track. What I want to do next is go ahead and make my fence parallel with the miter track as well. Now using a similar process, I went ahead and locked my fence in place, and using my combination square, I'm now just going to run it all the way along the miter track, and it should be the same distance all the way down. And similar to my blade, my fence is slightly towed out, so I want to go ahead and adjust it so it's parallel. And to make this adjustment, it's super simple. There's set screws on your fence. I have one on each side, and I just adjust whatever side I need to in order to get my fence to be parallel with the blade. So in my case, I want to go ahead and adjust the right side, so I'm just going to give it a small turn, and then I'll just keep double checking until I get it exactly where I need. So I actually got lucky and was able to get it on my first try. Now one thing to consider is having your fence slightly towed out just by a few thousandths of an inch, and that's gonna avoid the risk of having it being towed in a little bit and pinching the material as it's going through. So that's kind of how mine's set up. It's towed out just about like 2 or 4 thousandths of an inch, and that's exactly how I want it to be. So let's go ahead and make the last adjustment, and that's gonna be making sure my fence is a perfect 90 degrees. And for this, I'm just gonna use a speed square, set it up against my fence, and make sure that there's no gap along the edge, and it actually looks like I'm all dialed in there. Now say I did have to adjust this, it's similar to setting my fence for towing it in and out. There's a set screw, one on each side, and this is gonna raise and lower each side, and that's gonna allow me to get that perfect 90 degrees. So now I'd say I have my table saw really well fine-tuned, and I just wanna go ahead and make a couple test cuts, and I wanna focus on making sure that the saw blade isn't pulling the lumber away from the fence like it was in the past, so it should be riding nice and smooth up against it. So let's go ahead and make a few test cuts. So after making a few test cuts, I'm realizing that my riving knife and my blade are no longer parallel to each other, and it's kind of binding up the wood on the riving knife and the fence. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make a quick adjustment of that so that I don't have this binding anymore, and then I should be all set to go. And I can do that by loosening up these 2 outer screws. And then adjusting these 2 set screws until it's parallel with my blade. And that looks like my saw blade and my riving knife are now aligned perfectly, so I'm gonna go ahead and make a test cut just to double check. And now my riving knife is no longer pinching the wood against the fence after it passes through the saw blade. And as you can see, I have a nice smooth transition, and that's exactly what I want. So after a few simple adjustments, I now have a table saw that's working in peak condition. I got nice smooth square cuts, and the blade is no longer trying to pull the lumber away from the fence as I'm making a cut. So this is definitely something I had to address right away. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful, and if you did, let me know by giving it a big thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button for more woodworking videos. I'll see you guys next week with another project.